WHGE 95.3 FM. Coming up, the Open Eye. Hey, Sherry.
Those of us that indulge in or commit intellectual violence don't do so for the pleasure of mental masturbation or ego diddling. We do so because the chains of oppression on people's minds are deep and difficult to remove.
Good morning, my children of the sun. Welcome to the Open Eye on WHGE 95.3 FM. I'm your host, Third Eye Optometrist Patrice Gibbs, here to get that third eye open, yes indeed. And as we always start, every generation has its purpose. Ours is to reveal the truth and reverse the brainwashing. Let me get my disclaimer out the way, and then I'll be right back with my opening commentary.
The views and opinions expressed on the Open Eye are those of the hosts, guests, and contributors, and do not reflect the policy or position of WHGE 95.3 FM, nor our sponsor, the Delaware Center for Homeless Vets. Any content provided by Open Eye's hosts, guests, or contributors are theirs and are not intended to malign any religion, ethnic group, company, or individual.
All right. Let's get them started here. Okay. You're now tuned into the Open Eye. We do not blink at the truth. We do not flinch from history, and we refuse to sleep through the reality shaping our lives. Because vision is not just about what you see. It's about what you're willing to acknowledge. And the day we open our eyes, in a time where information is everywhere, but clarity is rare. Narratives are manufactured. Outrage is curated. Silence is strategic. And the public is expected to consume events without asking who benefits, who controls the story, who disappears from the headlines when the spotlight gets inconvenient. The Open Eye was never built to be comfortable. It was built to be conscious. From Wilmington streets to global power moves, from local community memory to international policy shifts. We examine the threads that connect it all. History, power, media, and the lived reality of our people. Because nothing happens in isolation. Not policy, not propaganda, not injustice, and certainly not progress. See, awareness is a discipline. And in an age of distraction, discipline is revolutionary. So today we're not here for surface level talking points. We're here for depth, context, pattern recognition. Because once you recognize patterns, you stop being manipulated by moments. This is the Open Eye. Not fear-driven, not reactionary, but observant, intentional, and unapologetically aware. Welcome to the show. I'm Patrice Gibbs. Hey, Theo, I see you, bro. All right, Rhonda. WHGE 95.3 FM. Damn, man, like I forgot which station I was at. I heard this quote, and I thought it was pretty interesting, so I thought to comment on it. You can win over a wise man with reason, but you can't win over a fool with proof. Facts don't work where pride is in charge. See how that goes? There's a dangerous illusion in public discourse that truth by itself is enough. That if you just present the right facts, the right documents, the right statistics, the right receipts, people will adjust their position accordingly. But history, psychology, and everyday human behavior all prove the opposite. You can win over a wise person with reason because a wise person is not emotionally married to being right. Their loyalty is to truth, not ego. When presented with new information, they evaluate, they reflect, and if necessary, they evolve. That is intellectual discipline. That's maturity. That's real strength. But a fool does not debate to discover truth. They debate to defend identity. Once pride becomes the foundation of a belief, facts stop functioning as tools of learning and become perceived as attacks. Evidence is no longer processed as information. It's filtered as a threat. The conversation stops being about what is true and starts being about who's winning. And when pride is in charge, losing the argument feels like losing status, dignity, or control. So instead of engaging with proof, the fool moves the goalposts, dismisses sources, deflects, or doubles down. This is why overwhelming evidence often fails to change deeply rooted beliefs. Not because the facts are weak, but because the ego wall is strong. Facts require humility to be effective. Proof requires a willingness to be wrong. Reason requires intellectual courage. Without those traits, truth becomes irrelevant. You can show documents, you can show footage, you can show historical records. You can show numbers, patterns, and contradictions. And still, someone ruled by pride will say, I don't believe it. Not because the evidence is insufficient, but because accepting it will require self-correction. And self-correction is the one thing pride resists the most. In community work, media, politics, and even everyday conversations, especially the kind of sharp commentary that I bring to the open eye, this principle shows up constantly. People are not always arguing from logic. They're arguing from allegiance to ideology, to tribe, to identity, to ego. So when you're speaking truth in the public spaces, understand this strategic reality. Some minds are listening for understanding. Others are listening for confirmation. Okay? Some people don't listen to understand. They listen to respond. The wise ask, is this true? The prideful asks, does this threaten what I already believe? That's why facts alone rarely transform hardened thinking. Transformation requires something deeper: intellectual humility, emotional security, and the courage to detach one's identity from one's opinion. Because the moment a person confuses being wrong with being diminished, proof becomes powerless. And that's the real lesson. Reason persuades the curious. Evidence persuades the honest. But neither can penetrate a mind where pride sits on the throne. Where pride is in charge, truth is treated like an enemy instead of a guide. This is the Open Eye. WHGE 95.3 FM. I'm Patrice Gibbs right here on Open Eye. Today is February 28th. It's the last day of Black History Month. All right. And I guess this Black History Month should have been, I don't know, it should have been more celebration. We should have been talking about, you know, our accomplishments, our history more and what have you, because this is the 100th year of Black History Month. It actually started out as Negro History Week in 1926 by Carter G. Woodson. And I tell you, I still hear people who have not studied our history, did not study who Carter G. Woodson was and why he did what he did, still running around. Oh, they gave us February, the shortest month of the year. They did not give us February. We took it. Carter G. Woodson established Negro History Week. I think it was in the second week of February, and he picked February because Frederick Douglass' birthday and Abraham Lincoln's birthday was in February. And yeah, I know, you know, maybe Mr. Woodson should have studied Lincoln a little more because in spite of him signing the Declaration of Independence, he was still a white supremacist. Don't get that mixed. Now, recently, in Post Falls, Idaho, their city council discussion was on removing Juneteenth as a city holiday. At a recent Post Falls, Idaho City Council meeting, officials discussed a proposed amendment to the city's personnel policy holiday schedule that will remove Juneteenth as an official city holiday while restoring Columbus Day. Yeah, you see me chill right there? Brother Bowen, why are you calling me? That's word. You see me chilling right there? To restore Columbus Day. And, you know, I watched some of this city council meeting. It was online. And the motion was formally introduced, second, and debated during the public session. The council members supported restoring Columbus Day as a holiday honoring American heritage. Now, another speaker acknowledged Juneteenth marks the end of slavery and called abolition one of the crowning achievements of Western civilization, but still suggested Columbus and European expeditions were foundational to the existence of the United States. A proposal was floated to alternate recognition of the holidays, though concerns about administrative complexity were raised. One council member stated Juneteenth was something nobody heard of until 5 years ago, and characterized it as politically motivated, expressing opposition to keeping it on the holiday schedule. All right, for those of you who don't know, Juneteenth commemorates June 19th, 1865, the day enslaved people in Galveston, Texas were informed of their freedom, more than 2 years after the Emancipation Proclamation. The holiday was celebrated within black communities for over 150 years and became a federal holiday just in 2021. Columbus Day, historically observed in October, commemorates Christopher Columbus' 1492 voyage. However, the holiday has been widely debated due to documented historical records of colonization, forced labor, violence, and exploitation of indigenous populations that followed European expansion in the Americas. In short, Columbus was a bastard. Mm-hmm. Enslaver, rapist. I mean, this cat was just a piece of crap. Policy implications. If enacted, the removal of Juneteenth would signal a shift in which historical events are officially recognized by local government, potentially create public backlash and community division. It would raise broader questions about historical education, representation, and civic values. It would align the city with a minority of municipalities that do not formally observe Juneteenth despite its federal recognition. And of course, obviously those against it, white supremacists. Forget about it. Let's be clear about what was said in that room. A government body sat in 2026 and debated whether the end of slavery is worthy of recognition, while arguing at the same time that Columbus better represents heritage. That is not a neutral administrative decision. That's a value statement. Mm-hmm. And the most revealing line was not about Columbus. It was this. Juneteenth is something nobody had heard of until 5 years ago. What nobody? That statement is not historical analysis, it's historical erasure. Because black people knew about Juneteenth and were celebrating it for over 150 years. Juneteenth was celebrated by black Americans for generations long before it was federally recognized. The fact that you didn't hear about it does not mean it didn't exist. It means it was ignored. It was ignored by textbooks, by institutions. It was ignored by the same structures now claiming it's political. Here's the contradiction they accidentally exposed. They admit slavery ended was a crowning achievement, yet resist commemorating the very day that symbolizes its actual enforcement. So which is it? Do you celebrate abolition in theory, or do you refuse to honor the people who lived long enough to finally receive their freedom? Excuse me. Because Juneteenth is not abstract history, it's delayed justice. It is the announcement of freedom to people who were illegally enslaved after emancipation was already declared. Now let's address the Columbus comparison. The argument presented was that America would not exist without European expeditions. And that may be true historically, but existence alone is not the same as moral honor. By that logic, any historical event that led to nation building, regardless of the violence, dispossession, or exploitation, becomes automatically worthy of celebration. That is not heritage. That is selective memory. And the idea that Juneteenth is political, while Columbus Day is heritage, reveals a deeper pattern. When history centers an empire, it's tradition. When history centers emancipation, it becomes politics. And that framing was intentional, because recognizing Juneteenth forces a society to confront slavery was real, freedom was delayed, justice was resisted, and liberation had to be enforced. It was not gifted. See, this moment is bigger than one city council vote. This is about historical legitimacy. Whose history is considered foundational? Whose suffering is considered commemorative? And whose freedom is considered optional to acknowledge? A holiday schedule is never just a calendar. It's a mirror of civic values. When the end of slavery is treated as negotiable and colonization is framed as heritage, without full context, we're not witnessing a scheduling debate. We're witnessing a hierarchy of memory. And that hierarchy tells you everything about what a society is comfortable honoring and what truths it is uncomfortable facing. Because if the abolition of slavery is truly a crowning achievement, then honoring Juneteenth should not be controversial. It should be obvious. Anything less raises a serious question. Is the discomfort about the holiday or about the history it forces people to remember? And that's the conversation they didn't say out loud. But the record said it any goddamn way. This is Open Eye. WHGE 95.3 FM, you're learning on Open Eye. Gotta start watching my mouth. I don't want to get us a fine from the FCC. Speaking of watching your mouth, I know by now, where was she? New York City, Hunter College. New York City college professor on the Zoom meeting making racial comments, racist comments, not just racial. I make racial comments. She's up there saying some racist stuff. Allison Friedman. And she identified herself as a college professor caught spewing racist language during a virtual council meeting. New York City students and community members gathered via Zoom for what was supposed to be a District 3 Community Education Council meeting about the city's plan to shut down several schools on Manhattan's West Side. The discussion instead took a horrific and racist turn after one professor forgot to mute her mic. Now she's facing the music. Allison Friedman, who worked as an associate professor at Hunter College in the state, was placed on leave amid an ongoing investigation in the comments made during a recent Zoom meeting. She is one of many educators logged on to hear from students about potentially closing several schools. That's from Newsweek. One unidentified black middle schooler stood before the council to give an emotional testimony about why she doesn't want her school to be shut down. But her moment was quickly overshadowed when Freeman unknowingly interrupted her. They're too dumb to know they're in a bad school, the professor said during the February 10 meeting. In a clip taken from the Zoom session, you can see students and staff first sharing confused looks. Then Friedman's unmuted mic continued. If you train a black person well enough, they'll know to use the back. You don't have to tell them anymore. According to the New York Times, the professor was referencing Superintendent Dr. Reginald Higgins, a black man who spoke earlier during the call. Ironically, Higgins' words came from a quote by Carter G. Woodson, who's the father of black history. All right? He incorrectly credited to Dr. King. In his 1933 book, The Miseducation of the Negro, Woodson explained how the indoctrination of enslaved people were key to the success of chattel slavery. He wrote, if you make a man feel that he's inferior, you do not have to compel him to accept an inferior status, for he will seek it himself. If you make a man think that he is justly an outcast, you do not have to order him to the back door. He will go without being told. And if there is no back door, his very nature will demand one. See, she took it all out of context. And fast forward to February 10th, when Woodson's words, like I said, were taken out of context. Freeman's hot mic moment was quickly met with drop jaws and wide eyes from other Zoom participants. One person jumped in to shut her down. Allison Freeman, what you're saying is absolutely hearable here. The person was heard saying, you gotta stop. After a long, awkward pause, the meeting continued with no more interruptions. Freeman later told the Times she was simply trying to explain the concept of systemic racism to her child, who was apparently also in the room with her. My complete comments made clear these abhorrent views are not my own, nor were they directed at any student or group. I fully support these courageous students in their efforts to stop school closures. She apologized for the impact her remarks made on participants in the Zoom call. However, I recognize these comments caused harm and pain. While that was not my intent, I do truly apologize. Hunter College President Nancy Cantor later acknowledged Freeman's words in the context of Black History Month. This painful incident unfolded at a meeting where Black History Month was being celebrated, and the pernicious and enduring effects of anti-Black systemic racism were being discussed, especially in regard to the role of educational institutions in addressing them, Cantor said. Hunter has long embraced such a role, which requires constant vigilance to remain attentive and responsive to the ways in which we continually draw. Oh, what a crock of stuff. That's word. And she was trying to educate her child. BS. She was not. Let's be clear what happened here. A Black child stood up in public education meeting to defend her school, to defend her future. An adult with institutional power, a college professor, used that moment to make the humanizing remarks when she thought no one could hear her. That is not just a hot mic mistake. That's a window into her mindset. Because microphones don't create racism, they reveal it. The disturbing part is not just the words, too dumb, and invoking segregation era language about knowing to use the back. That language is not accidental. That language has a historical lineage. It echoes the exact psychological conditioning that Carter G. Woodson warned about in The Miseducation of the Negro. Read that if you haven't. The normalization of inferiority as a social script imposed on Black people through institutions, especially education. And where did this happen? At an education council meeting about closing schools while a Black student was speaking. That context matters. We are not talking about a random slip and a private conversation. We are talking about a power dynamic. An educator in a policy space speaking over a Black child's testimony about school closure. That's the very definition of systemic disregard dressed up as administrative discourse. Now comes the familiar sequence. I was explaining systemic racism. Oh, it was taken out of context. That's not my view. I apologize for the harm. Here's the problem. When you are truly explaining systemic racism, you do not do it by casually reproducing racist language during a live meeting where Black students are present. Especially not in a tone that participants immediately recognize as harmful. Notice the reaction in the room. Confused looks, drop jaws. Immediate interruption. That tells you everything about how that comment landed in real time. Not through media spin, not through edited clips, but through the raw response of people who heard it live. And let's talk about the irony that can't be ignored. Carter G. Woodson's quote was originally a warning about how systems condition people into accepting inferiority. Yet in this moment, his words were twisted into justification framework. While Black child was actually resisting institutional closure of her school. That is not just misinterpretation, that is historical distortion in real time. Even the institutional response reflects a broader pattern. Administrative statements about pain, context, and vigilance while investigations proceed. Leave is issued. Apologies are released. Language becomes sanitized. But the underlying issue remains untouched. The normalization of anti-black assumptions within academic and policy spaces that claim to champion equity. Because here's the uncomfortable truth. Elite educational spaces often speak the language of anti-racism publicly while reproducing racial bias privately. A professor on a Zoom call is not just an individual. They are representative of an institution, a gatekeeper of knowledge, and a participant in shaping educational policy culture. So when a Black student's plea about school closures is overshadowed by a racist interruption, it sends a message far louder than any apology. Your testimony is secondary. Your school is negotiable. Your intelligence is questioned before your argument is even heard. And that is precisely the kind of institutional condition Woodson warned about, not through chains, but through language, policy, and perception. The real issue is not whether the mic was muted. The real issue is what was said when the speaker believed accountability was absent. Because history shows us something consistent. People are rarely more honest when they think no one is listening. And in this case, a Black child was listening. Students were listening. Educators were listening. The public was listening. The question now is not just about one professor. It's about whether educational institutions will confront the deeper culture that allows such thinking to exist in spaces tasked with shaping young minds. Especially during Black History Month, especially in the meeting about Black and brown student schools, especially when the very quote and vote was meant to expose, not reenact the psychological mechanics of racial hierarchy. That is the contradiction that cannot be ignored. It's the open eye. WHGE 95.3 FM. All right. I don't watch award shows too much. You know, they're not what they used to be. I'm not real interested in mainstream society's approval of our people's talents. Okay. Recently, Sunday night, last Sunday, and the BAFTA award. I think that's like the British version of the Oscars or something like that. Right? Now, John Davison, who was the real life inspiration for the celebrated British film I Swear, shouted the N-word at Michael B. Jordan and Delroy Lindo, while the Center Stars were presenting the award for Best Visual Effects. The outburst followed an opening monologue from host Alan Cumming, during which Davison, who has Tourette's syndrome, was involuntarily ticking. You know, people with Tourette's syndrome holler stuff out involuntarily. Okay. And the outburst followed. Oh, I already said that. Okay. The audience had been informed of Davison's condition before the show began. But it was only after he said the racial slur that Cumming openly addressed the issue. So you may have noticed some strong language in the background. This can be part of how Tourette's syndrome shows up for some people as the film explores that experience. He's talking about Davison. And Cummings went on to explain from the stage, "Thanks for your understanding and for helping create a respectful space for everyone." After the incident, Davison appeared to remove himself from the theater. Here's the deeper point beneath the outrage. This was not a live, uncontrolled broadcast. This was a taped show, which means there were editors, there were producers, there were executives. There was a final approval process. And that means one thing above all else. What the public saw was a deliberate editorial decision. So when people try to redirect the conversation into distractions, ableism, Tourette's, it was accidental, it was complicated, they are skipping over the core institutional reality. The BBC and BAFTA did not accidentally air raw footage. They reviewed it, they processed it, they signed off on it. They chose to keep it in the final cut. That choice matters more than any individual moment on stage. Because once something enters the edit bay, it stops being a mistake and becomes a message. And historically, Western media institutions have a long documented pattern of sensationalizing Black pain, Black trauma, and racial harm when it is profitable, clickable, or controversy generating. Outrage drives engagement. Engagement drives headlines. Headlines drives traffic. Traffic drives revenue. And that's the cold machinery of media economics. So the real question is not just why was the word said. The real question is why was it preserved? Editors routinely remove profanity, awkward gestures, awkward pauses, offensive slips, wardrobe malfunctions, technical mistakes. They clean broadcasts all the time. Entire segments get cut for far less. So the idea that something as loaded, historically violent, and globally understood as the N-word simply slipped through in a taped award show strains credibility. That is not how high-level broadcast production works. What we are looking at is an institutional filter that decided the shock value was worth more than the harm. And that is where the conversation shifts from individual behavior to systemic media culture. Because when racial harm becomes content, it becomes commodified. When it becomes commodified, it becomes normalized. And when it becomes normalized, institutions no longer treat it as harm, they treat it as spectacle. Notice how quickly the discourse pivots away from impact and toward protecting institutions. Suddenly, the framing becomes about intent, diagnosis, public relations, and damage control. Anything except the editorial chain of responsibility. That redirection is not accidental either. It is a classic institutional shield, individualize the incident, medicalize the narrative, and depoliticize the decision-making structure. But again, this was not the live stream glitch. This was a curated broadcast, which means multiple layers of predominantly elite media gatekeepers saw the footage and concluded, leave it in. That is the decision that deserves scrutiny. Not as a conspiracy, but as a pattern. A pattern where controversy involving Black identity, language, or trauma is often treated as culturally explosive content rather than something requiring heightened editorial care. In that framework, outrage is not a failure of the system, it is a feature of the system. And for an audience that is historically aware, especially one like yours, that engages in historical media critique right here on the Open Eye, the issue isn't just about one award show moment. It's about institutional accountability, editorial ethics, and who gets protected versus who gets exposed when harm enters the media pipeline. So when people discuss the incident, the intellectually honest focus should not stop at the stage. It should extend to the edit room, to the approval chain, to the broadcast standards, and to the economic incentive structures that reward controversy over care. Because damn if they didn't cut out people saying free Gaza. They cut that out. Because once a tape program airs something that could have been removed, the conversation is no longer about accident. It's about decision. And decisions inside powerful media institutions are never neutral. I'm Patrice Gibbs. This is The Open Eye. Hey, Brother Fred. What's up, Roger? All right. Thanks for joining me. WHGE 95.3 FM. Moving right along with The Open Eye. I got this from this comedian. I'm not sure where he got it. I tried to do a little research on it. It may have came from Chris Rock, but I'm not sure. All right, but check this out, guys. I thought it was pretty funny. Got my comment on it. All right. People think the world's going to hell. That's it. That it's gotten so violent. But the world never got violent. There's no God. The world has been violent since the beginning. Cain killed Abel. Cain killed Abel. The third person on the planet killed the fourth person on the planet. We weren't even able to make it the three people before somebody was a murderer. At one time, 1/3 of the people on the planet were murderers, right? 1/3 of the people in the hood aren't murderers. 1/3 of the people who own guns aren't murderers. 1/3 of the people in jail aren't even murderers. San Quentin, Alcatraz, Folsom Prison, they're safer than the book of Genesis. You think Compton and Baghdad are tough? Try downtown Eden when the sun goes down. There's murder and violence. That first couple who had 2 boys, they had that whole world to themselves. And one of them was claiming This town ain't big enough for the two of us. Cain killed 25% of the world's population. That's more than Hitler, Idi Amin, Pol Pot, King Herod, Genghis Khan, Manifest Destiny, typhoid, cancer, AIDS, and cooties, all combined. Cain killed 1/3 of the people he knew. He knew 3 people. He killed one of them. If you knew Cain, you had a 66.2 chance of survival. There's no such thing as the good old days. There was like one good day, maybe a half a day. Adam and Eve were naked, alone in their oasis. Lunchtime came. People got hungry. Apples were eaten. Boom, Detroit. Damn. I ain't like that Detroit in there. Boom, America. More realistic. Let me tell you why that line hits harder than people realize. We romanticize the past because distance softens memory. People say the world has gotten violent. And this violence is some modern invention, like it came with social media or politics or cities or whatever scapegoat is convenient this decade. But the truth, violence is not a glitch in human history. It is a constant feature of it. The very first recorded family story in the dominant Western tradition is not about harmony. It's not about cooperation. It's not about civilization. It's about jealousy, resentment, and murder. Cain and Abel is not just a religious anecdote. It's a psychological statement about humanity. Proximity does not eliminate conflict. In fact, it often intensifies it. Think about that. Not strangers, not nations, not armies, brothers. And before society could even form, before institutions, before governments, before media narratives, before crime statistics, violence was already present, which destroys the comforting myth that if we just go back far enough, things were peaceful. They weren't. Oh, I caught myself. Bull. What that quote is really dismantling is nostalgia propaganda. The illusion of the good old days. Because the so-called good old days included slavery, conquest, plagues, feudal brutality, public executions, colonial violence, and constant war. The difference is not that the world is more violent now. The difference is that violence is more visible now. Back then, violence was normalized. Now it's documented. And that shift in visibility tricks people into thinking the present is uniquely chaotic. The Cain and Abel analogy also exposes something deeper. Violence is not primarily a product of environment alone. It's tied to ego, comparison, perceived injustice, and wounded pride. The same emotional triggers are we still see today in politics, community conflicts, and global tension. The setting changes. The psychology does not. The line about 1/3 of the people on the planet were murderers is dark humor, but it carries a philosophical punch. The scale of humanity does not eliminate human nature. Expanding population did not invent aggression. It diluted its statistical concentration. And the part about eating, that satire is actually biting social commentary. We imagine paradise as stable, But the narrative suggests that even in abundance, even without scarcity, even without systemic oppression or economic struggle, conflict still emerged. Which challenges the simplistic ideal that violence is only caused by material hardship. History shows us empires at their peak were violent. Religious eras were violent. Civilized ages were violent. Revolutionary ages were violent. What changes is not the existence of violence, it's how societies manage, justify, suppress, or expose it. So when people say the world is going to hell, what they are often expressing is not an increase in violence, but an increase in awareness, anxiety, and information flow. A 24-hour feed global suffering creates the illusion of unprecedented chaos, when in reality, previous generations lived inside violence that was closer, quieter, and less recorded. There were never truly good old days. There were quieter days for some and brutal days for others. And that last line, the comedic snap, from Eden to collapse, is actually a sharp metaphor. Civilization did not decay overnight. It has always been a fragile balance between cooperation and conflict, constantly negotiated, constantly strained. Humanity did not fall from peace into violence. Humanity has always been negotiating with violence. The real question is not why violence exists. The real question is whether awareness of it leads to wisdom or just nostalgia for a past that never existed. This is the open eye. All right, WHGE 95.3 FM. Speaking of violence, and it's something that old men start wars. Old rich men for young poor men to go die in. Yep. Smedley Butler, General Smedley Butler, he said it right. War is a racket. So Israel, is it real? And the Trump regime had been going on with their plans to attack Iran. Keep your eyes open, keep your eyes on this. Now, Iran said they were going to release some photos they got that would show the orange disaster in a compromising position. You know, this is sorry, stinky, dirty diaper ass show up. You're already showing him in a compromising position. As soon as he opened his goddamn mouth. All right, moving on. I want to address something, disturbing pattern here. Because we don't like to deal with patterns. Patterns are evidence. Mario Kaiser Jr., April 29, 2025, found hanging from a tree in Charlotte, North Carolina, ruled a suicide. You remember Earl Smith from Albany, New York? Yeah, he was found 2 months later, June the 11th, 2025, hanging from a tree, ruled a suicide. So now here's everyone else that came after him. This black man's name is still not public, but his body was first found June 30th, 2025 on a hiking trail in Oakland, California, hanging from a tree, ruled a suicide. Trey Reed on campus of Delta State University in Cleveland, Mississippi. Body first found hanging from a tree, September 15, 2025. State autopsy ruled it a suicide. A second independent autopsy funded by Colin Kaepernick found blunt force trauma to the back of his head. You do the math. Javon Gavin, Albuquerque, New Mexico, finally identified October 1st, 2025. And I use the phrase finally identified because for some odd reason, not only did he seem to be treated as a John Doe case, not only did they swiftly rule it a suicide when he was found hanging from a tree, not only did they cremate his body after the ruling, but they did all this a year prior to notifying his family. Ruled a suicide. Tory Short, Torrance Medley, Brookfield, Wisconsin, found hanging from a tree November 13th on a golf course that he had no previous access to. Ruled a suicide. The most recent hanging death, Kyle Basinger, Marietta, Georgia, found hanging from a tree February 18th. This month, 10 days ago. And of course, they're trying to rule it a suicide. Yeah, honorable mention for those we know also will not get an ounce of justice due to corruption and or incompetence. Keith Porter Jr., Dr. Linda Davis, DeQuan Johnson, killed by ICE. In a span of 10 months, one white politician, 10 black bodies, only 9 identified. In a span of 10 months, and I reiterate, I don't wish this on anyone. I wouldn't wish this on any family. But let it be one white wife. Let it be someone's white child. Let it be one white billionaire. And we will sit back and watch how quickly the media turns around and suddenly cares. I'm going to tell you something about these suicides. We do not, as black men, have a record of unaliving ourselves by hanging ourselves from a tree. We do have a record of being strange fruit hanging from a tree. But that's not something that we do. But they were ruled a suicide. And you don't even hear about it. See, at the core, this commentary is about perceived selective urgency. Not just about death, not just about rulings, but about whose lives trigger sustained national concern and whose lives are processed quietly through bureaucratic conclusions. When communities repeatedly see stories involving black victims and see that it receives minimal coverage, limited follow-up, and rapid narrative closure, it reinforces a long-standing belief that systemic attention is not evenly distributed, and that silence in the face of repeated tragedy and trauma and violence begins to feel like coincidence, or it begins to feel less like coincidence and more like a pattern of neglect. They did not hang themselves. This is the open eye. right, all right. All right, moving right along. WHGE 95.3 FM. All right. I want to thank you, Sister Sherry, for bringing my attention to this, because you know I watch Burkina Faso. Burkina Faso has entered into a 5-year health cooperation agreement with the United States. Despite several African nations declining to sign similar arrangements. The initiative is designed to combat infectious diseases, including HIV/AIDS, malaria. It's meant to strengthen disease surveillance systems and support the digitization of health data to enhance outbreak detection and response across the Sahel region. Now, let me get right to this here. All right. Let me see here. Burkina Faso, under President Ibrahim Traoré, had begun dismantling the neo-colonial architecture left behind by France. Foreign mining interests have been challenged, national infrastructure prioritized, colonial symbols removed, language identity reasserted, a clear sovereignty posture. Okay? All right. Let's hold up here and take a look at this, because history is screaming right now. Colonizers do not re-enter through chains anymore. They re-enter through contracts. They re-enter through aid frameworks. They re-enter through infrastructure deals, through data access. Africa has lived this cycle before repeatedly. First came missionaries, then came traders, then came military protection agreements, and then came economic dependency, and then came total control. Different century, same playbook. Now, President Traoré is leading a sovereignty revolution against France. And here's the truth. Breaking from one colonizer while opening strategic system to another is not liberation. It's repositioning within the same global power structure. Let's be clear, when Western powers request biological samples, citizen health data digitization, integrated surveillance infrastructure, and embedded foreign funded workforce systems, it's not about public health. It's about strategic access. It's long-term leverage disguised as humanitarian cooperation. It's not. And history shows that Western empires have extracted more than gold and uranium from Africa. They extracted labor, knowledge, genetic data, agricultural resources, medical research value, and geopolitical positioning. And then sold the solutions back at a premium. And that's not a theory, that's a pattern. Now add the geopolitical contradiction. Visa restrictions placed on Burkina Faso. Diplomatic limitations enforced, yet financial integration through health systems expanded. That's not neutral policy behavior, that's strategic engagement under controlled access. You restrict movement, but expand institutional influence. You distance politically, but embed structurally. That's Textbook soft power penetration. Mm-hmm. And Burkina Faso is not just signing a health agreement. It may be opening a strategic gateway into its internal systems at the exact moment it's trying to reclaim sovereignty. That's a dangerous contradiction. A nation cannot wage anti-colonial resistance externally while permitting deep structural penetration internally. That's how neocolonialism modernizes itself. Not with soldiers, with systems. Not with flags, with frameworks. Not with occupation, with integration. So the warning is this: do not let humanitarian language disarm revolutionary vigilance. Do not let funding override sovereignty calculus. Do not assume that modern empires operate with old aesthetics. They don't. They operate quietly, technically, contractually, systemically. History has shown us this over and over, because colonization in the 21st century does not knock on the door with an army. It logs into the system with permission. Watch the pattern and study the power. And I'll tell you why it's such a bad ideal, Ibrahim. Because of the way that America has stifled innovation. You know, since the United States left the World Health Organization, look what was transpired. In Japan, scientists have used regenerative medicine to restore motor function in paralyzed patients. In China, scientists have reversed Alzheimer's in mice. This has happened for the first time in 100 years. That Alzheimer's may very well be reversible because of this progress in science. In Vietnam, doctors used stem cells to cure leukemia. In Brazil, researchers have discovered an earwax test that may be able to detect cancer before tumors form in your body. In Korea, scientists have reversed colon cancer. In Mexico, Mexican scientists have successfully eliminated HPV. In Cuba, doctors have developed a lung cancer vaccine. And in Russia, they've announced that there's a new cancer vaccine that they believe to be 100% successful in clinical trials. Got that report from Sister Influence I Am Tangy. Other places have found out how to regrow teeth. How to regrow teeth. This has happened since America left the World Health Organization. Yeah. The way America has stifled innovation, the way America had held a thumb on progress and just suffocated. It's a bigger picture. It's because you want black people to lose so bad. Because all the inventions, I don't have to make the rules aren't even mine. 90% of the inventions, I say 96%, because you don't want us to patent, trademark, or get credit. We can't, so y'all won't. You understand? Whose fault is it? It's ours. It's America's fault. Big time. Yeah, that's her. For not stopping them. All right? And I'm going to tell you something. How is it you are not able to say this out loud before the pharmaceutical company like World Health Organization, because that's what happened. That's what happened. Damn. Once the World Health Organization, once the U.S. put out the World Health Organization, the pharmaceuticals no longer had influence. Now all these innovations and advancements in health have come to the fore. How corrupt is America? How evil are we? Well, and that's the wonder. WHGE 95.3 FM, the Open Eye. All right. WHGE 95.3 FM. It's the Open Eye. Hey, hope you learned something, because I learned something before I got here. I want you to remember this as I get ready to close out. Awareness is not a trend. It's a responsibility. An informed community cannot be easily misled. A conscious people cannot be easily controlled, and a historically grounded mind cannot be easily rewritten. That's why platforms like the Open Eye, not just to inform, but to preserve memory, sharpen perspective, and challenge the narratives that attempt to dull public consciousness. Because when people forget history, they repeat manipulation. When people ignore patterns, they normalize injustice. And when people close their eyes, systems operate on check. Not here, not with us. We watching and we critical. And above all, we remain aware of the forces shaping our communities, our media, and our future. So whether you're listening from the city blocks, the workplace, the classroom, or right there at your kitchen table, carry the day's insight with you. Question what you're told, research what you hear, and never surrender your ability to think independently. It's the Open Eye, where consciousness meets commentary and truth is examined, not avoided. Keep your mind sharp and your vision clear and your awareness active. And as I always tell you, destiny determines your life. Destiny determines who enters your life, but you decide who stays. Therefore, value those who value you, and don't treat those as a priority who treat you as an option. Thanks for joining me. This has been Open Eye on WHGE 95.3 FM. I'm Patrice Gibbs. All right. Somebody send my show over to Burkina Faso. Your brother might be making a big mistake over there, but I still believe global African supremacy. Because history is cyclical. Goes in a cycle. That cycle is coming back around. Peace and love.